Leaders are hoping to finish deliberations on the measure this week. They'll begin with an hour of general speeches and then take a break at 12:30 for their weekly party lunches. They'll reconvene at 2:15. And now live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, source of all life, may your power be felt today in the United States Senate. Strengthen our senators with your might, infusing them with faith to look beyond today's challenges with confidence that you are still in control. Lord, impart to them knowledge that will enable them to find creative solutions to the problems that beset us. Keep your hand upon all the citizens of this great land, protecting them from evil as you guide them along the pathway of life. Help us to remember that we should be one in purpose, seeking the best for our republic. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., November 29, 2011. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Christopher A. Kumus, a senator from the state of Delaware, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business for an hour. The majority will control the first half. The Republicans will control the final half. Following that morning business, the Senate will resume consideration of the Department of Defense Authorization Bill. The Senate will recess from 12:30 until 2:15 today for the weekly caucus meetings. The filing deadline for all first-degree amendments to the Defense Authorization Bill is 2:30 today. We'll continue to work through the amendments. The managers of this bill, Senator Levin and Senator McCain, are certainly experienced with this bill and the legislative processes here, and they're going to do their best to move through this as quickly as possible. We'll notify members when there are votes scheduled. And that we should be able to have a few votes today. I would hope so. I'm told, Mr. President, S. 1917 is due for a second reading.
Clerk will read the title of the bill for a second time.
S. 1917, a bill to create jobs by providing payroll tax relief for middle-class families and businesses and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I object to any further proceedings with respect to this bill.
The objection's been heard, and the bill will be placed on the calendar under Rule 14.
Mr. President, Senate Democrats' #1 priority of this Congress is to pass common sense legislation. For example, tax cuts, infrastructure investments. All these ideas that we have will put Americans back to work and revive our economy. Republicans in the House, on the other hand, are focused on gutting the safeguards that keep our air clean, make our workplaces safe, and check the greed of big Wall Street firms. Never mind that this wholesale destruction of measures that save millions of lives and trillions of dollars each year has no chance of passing here in the Senate. Never mind that nonpartisan experts and economists from both sides of the aisle say that their so-called jobs agenda would create not a single job. House Republicans complain we've not taken up and passed these policies, which would risk American lives while doing nothing to improve our economy. They insist that we should waste weeks or months on legislation that is both dangerous and proven to fail. But the Senate has too much work to do on legislation that will create jobs without risking American lives to waste time on these ineffectual, purely partisan measures. Unlike Republicans, our jobs agenda was designed to create jobs, not headlines. And in any case, the Senate has passed its own share of legislation, 40 pieces, in fact, is yet to be taken up by the House Republicans. The Senate has passed legislation that would stop China from cheating American workers by manipulating its currency, evening the playing field for American exporters and saving jobs. We've passed a bill to modernize the air travel system. FAA reauthorization is so important, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs, but would also keep passengers safer and save money and travel time. We've passed a measure that would protect lives by keeping our food safe from contamination. House Republicans have refused to take up these worthy pieces of legislation, period. They just don't take them up. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans have blocked many reasonable jobs proposals with a proven track record of success. They're simply too busy rooting for our economy to fail and pursuing an extreme social agenda to work with Democrats to create jobs. But that won't stop Democrats from doing everything in our power to get the economy back on track. That's why Senator Casey has introduced legislation to put money back in the pockets of middle-class workers and small businesses by extending and expanding the payroll tax cut. This legislation cut taxes for 160 American workers, saving the average family $1,500 each year. Those families will have more money to spend on the local economy, grocery stores or pharmacies, giving communities across the country a financial shot in the arm. The proposal would also give payroll tax cuts to businesses, including 50,000 firms, businesses in Nevada. More than 1.2 million Nevada workers benefited from the payroll tax cut this year. Under our proposal, they'll get even greater tax relief next year. Payroll tax cuts have also been a boon to the economies of every state in the nation. In Kentucky, for example, the home of my friend, the minority leader, 2.1 million workers took home $1.2 billion in payroll tax cuts this year alone. That's why the minority leader said in 2009 that a payroll tax cut, quote, would put a lot of money back in the hands of businesses and in the hands of individuals, end of quote. The average Kentucky family will keep $1,330 of their hard-earned money next year under our expanded payroll tax rate. 70,000 firms in Kentucky will benefit from these new tax cuts. In 2009, Senator McConnell went on to say, quote, Republicans, generally speaking, from Maine to Mississippi, like tax relief, end of quote. Yet Republicans already appear poised to block this legislation. So let's be clear what a no vote on this proposal really means. It's a vote to deny tax relief to millions of businesses. It's a vote to raise taxes for 120 million families by about $1,000 each. Republicans who vote no will literally be taking money out of the pockets of middle-class families. Once upon a time, Republicans rushed to cut taxes, regardless of which tax cut it was or whether it added trillions to the deficit. For example, the Bush tax cuts we hear so much about added trillions of dollars to our deficit, and it's obvious from what's going on during the Bush years and now that these tax cuts have not created any jobs that amount to anything. Today they're lining up against a new tax cut, my Republican friends. They'll put money back in the pockets of the middle class, ensure businesses have more cash to hire new workers, and get our economy moving immediately. So I hope Republicans will now start working with us to pass a tax cut for 160 American workers in nearly every business in America. As my friend, the Republican leader, said, quote, Republicans, generally speaking, from Maine to Mississippi, like tax relief, end of quote. I hope they remember what the Republican leader has said time and time again. Would the chair announce the business for the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved, and under the previous order, There will now be a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I'd like to take a few moments here in the Senate to pay tribute to a remarkable woman. Maggie Daly served with dignity and grace for 22 years as Chicago's First Lady. She died on Thanksgiving evening after a nearly decade-long struggle with breast cancer. She was at home, surrounded by her loving family. There is a sad but fitting poignancy to the date. People in Chicago and far beyond have so many reasons to be thankful for the life of this exceptional woman. Maggie Daly was an adopted daughter of Chicago, but no native-born Chicagoan could have loved the city more or served it better. Last May, as her husband Rich prepared to step down as Chicago's mayor, the Chicago Tribune ran an article about what Maggie Daly had meant to Chicago. The first paragraph really put it well, and I quote, "There's never been and may never be a Chicago First Lady of greater impact, influence, and inspiration than Maggie Daly." Maggie was smart, funny, tireless, amazingly modest, and deeply compassionate. She was also a very private person, yet she still managed to touch the lives of so many people. The love Chicagoans feel for Maggie Daly was reflected in the faces of the people who waited in line this last Sunday, over a block long in the rain, to attend her wake at the Chicago Cultural Center, incidentally a building which she worked hard to restore. I stood in that line and talked to many people. Some of them I knew from my public life and their public lives, but many just private citizens, some of whom had met her briefly, some had worked with her for years, but they all came to pay tribute to her. Among them was Hazel Holt, 74 years old. Chicago Tribune described Mrs. Holt as a person who decided to drive downtown in her church finery from the Gresham neighborhood on the south side, pay for parking, take a bus, then walk on a damp, chilly November day to stand in line for the wake. Mrs. Holt said that Maggie Daly, quote, "built connections to the city's people with her commitment to charities assisting children, as well as her public poise in the face of cancer that would claim her life." She then went on to say to the reporter, "I just love this lady. I wish I had 1/4 of her grace. She was a role model for a lot of us." That's a feeling shared by many of us in Chicago and beyond. Upon hearing of Maggie's death, Nancy Brinker, the founder and CEO of the Susan G. Komen Foundation for the Cure, said, "We've lost a real general." Loretta and I were blessed to have known Maggie personally, and Rich has been my friend, my colleague, even my boss for decades. Yesterday morning, I attended Maggie's funeral at the old St. Patrick's Church, our neighborhood parish in Chicago. I remembered the last Mass that I had attended there with Maggie and Rich Daly. It was St. Patrick's Day. It's a big day in Chicago on St. Patrick's Day, and ground zero for the celebration, Old St. Pat's. It was clear that Maggie's health was flagging. She had to sit through most of the service. She came to the front pew in a wheelchair. But all of those struggles were quickly forgotten as her grandkids, children and grandkids, were seated next to her, and we heard from the back of the church after the Mass that sound we all waited for, the famous Shannon Rovers Bagpipe Band from the Bridgeport section of Chicago. And they come marching up the center aisle with those bagpipes blasting. It is a moment you'll never forget. Well, Maggie's grandkids were nervously waiting, expectantly waiting for the sound of the bagpipes, scrambling all over the pew and all over Maggie and Rich, to get to the point where they could peer out down the center aisle to watch the bagpipers come away. I looked at Maggie and Rich at that moment, and I saw them beaming with the kind of joy that loving parents and grandparents just live for. Maggie was a patron saint of social causes, but her deepest convictions were to God and her family. Maggie and Rich Daly have been blessed with 4 children, Patrick, Nora, Kevin, and Lally. Years ago, she made her husband keep a promise to reserve Sundays exclusively for private family time. So the bottom line was this. You could ask Mayor Daly 6 days of the week to go anywhere in Chicago or anywhere else. But Sunday, no way. He made a promise to Maggie. That was Family Day. It's a promise he always kept, and we respected. 2 weeks ago, the family announced that their youngest daughter, Lally, had moved the date of her wedding from New Year's Eve to mid-November so that Maggie could attend. It was a signal that the end was near. But she was at that wedding, in her wheelchair, with her irrepressible smile, a beaming mother celebrating her daughter's happiness, quintessential Maggie Daly. Part of the reason Maggie found such joy in life is that she understood what a fragile gift life was. In 1981, her third child, Kevin, died from spina bifida, just months shy of his third birthday. After Kevin's death, she found healing and meaning in reaching out to help others, and especially in volunteering to work for kids with disabilities. Someone once called her the godmother of all Chicago's children. Mayor Rahm Emanuel said on her passing, Mayor Rich Daly may have been the head of the city, but Maggie Daly was the heart of Chicago. In 1991, Maggie and Lois Weisberg, Chicago's longtime Commissioner of Cultural Affairs and an icon in her own right, began something called Gallery 37. It was an abandoned piece of real estate in the middle of downtown Chicago that had been lost in legal and court battles for decades, and she decided, with Lois, to set up a tent on this old plot of land that was sitting vacant and create Gallery 37, which was an art gallery for kids. So all across Chicago, they invited kids, grade school and high school kids, to submit their artwork. And we all went down there for the joy of that moment and seeing the kids, the pride they had, and some of the magnificent artwork that they produced, all because Maggie and Lois decided here was an opportunity they couldn't miss. The program later morphed or matured into an amazing program called After School Matters. Maggie thought, if I can occupy these kids with art and music and drama and theater and chorus during the school year, let's do it after school, a vulnerable time for many kids. So over 2 decades, Maggie Daly nurtured the artistic talents of thousands of Chicago high school students and became a model for programs in many cities across the country and as far away as London and Australia. The last time Maggie was in this building was in my office to come upstairs and to sit and lobby me for money for After School Matters. Needless to say, she won my vote and my support. Maggie Daly believed that art could change lives. She believed that artistic talent could exist in children from the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago as surely as it could from children in better, more wealthy neighborhoods, and that all the young people should have the opportunity to develop their talents together. That's why After School Matters has become such an amazing program. Maggie Daly also served on the auxiliary board of the Art Institute and the women's board of the Rehab Institute of Chicago. She was a very busy person. It was a happy accident that she came to Chicago. Margaret Ann Corbett Daly was born and grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh. She was the youngest of Patrick and Elizabeth Corbett's 7 kids and their only girl. After graduating in 1965 from the University of Dayton, she entered a management training program for Xerox, and her job took her to Chicago. She promised her dad she was just going to stay in Chicago for 2 years and then come back to Pittsburgh. But in 1970, she met a young attorney named Rich Daly at a Christmas party, and they decided to date, got engaged, married for nearly 40 years. Now, the average survival rate for Maggie's form of breast cancer that has spread beyond the breast and lymph nodes is very brief. Maggie Daly lived with this incurable illness for 9 years. Her doctors called it a medical miracle. She endured years of painful treatment and faced her cancer with courage, dignity, grace, and good humor. As the cancer progressed, she relied on crutches, a walker, and eventually even a wheelchair. But the smile never quit. She donated generously to help open the Maggie Daly Center for Women's Cancer Care at Northwestern Hospital last year. The center helps other women facing cancer by providing access to doctors and important support services. Loretta and I obviously offer our deepest condolences to Rich Daly, his wonderful children and their families, all the Daly children and grandchildren. We trust that time and treasured memories will ease the great sorrow that they obviously feel. They can also take comfort in knowing that the legacy of Margaret Corbett Daly can be seen and felt all over the adopted city she loved. Maggie Daly's dedication to the arts will continue in part through the work of her daughters, Nora Daly Conroy, who chairs Chicago's Cultural Affairs Advisory Committee, and of course Lally, who will continue in her mom's tradition. Her commitment to education will live on in the lives of the young people she's touched. Her courage will endure in the women she inspired, who can now find medical care at the center she helped establish. Maggie Daly was a modest person. She didn't like to talk about herself. She preferred speaking of others. 2 years after she was diagnosed with cancer, however, she gave an interview to the Chicago Sun-Times in which she hinted about how she felt about her future. This is what she said, and I quote, "I try not to waste any time. At the end of the day, what's important is if you think that the people around you have maybe had a better day because of some of the things you've done." Well, by that standard and so many others, Maggie Daly lived a good and full life. She did much good, and she will be greatly missed. Mr. President, I ask that the statement I'm about to be made be placed at a separate place in the record from my previous remarks.
Without objection.
I see my colleague on the floor, and I'm not going to take but a moment to say that we have an opportunity now, before we leave for Christmas, to not forget people across America who are struggling in this economy. There is a payroll tax cut that was instituted by President Obama, supported by Congress, which basically gives more working families a little bit extra money each month. For the average working family in Illinois, it's about $1,500 a year. For some of us in the Senate, that may not seem like an enormous sum of money, but for families struggling paycheck to paycheck, it makes a big, big difference. So we need to make certain that we restore this payroll tax cut, which is going to expire at the end of this year. How terrible it would be for us to impose an additional burden on working families, to impose a new payroll tax on working families when they're struggling and this economy needs their spending power. Every economist has taken a look at it and said the two best things Congress can do to help this economy move forward and not fall back is to make sure this payroll tax cut is protected and that this new payroll tax is not imposed on families, and secondly, to extend unemployment benefits for the millions across America who are still struggling to find a job. We need to call on our Republican colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, for goodness sakes, how can we in good conscience go home to celebrate the holiday season with our families and say to the millions of working families across America, incidentally, January 1st, your taxes are going up? That's wrong. It's not fair. Whatever our rationale politically, it makes no sense in the family rooms and neighborhoods of America that we would impose a new payroll tax on working families who are working so hard to keep their heads above water. Before we leave, let us follow the lead of Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania, who's sponsoring this. Let us extend this payroll tax cut to help working families and help our economy, and we shouldn't go home for Christmas without that and some help when it comes to extending unemployment benefits. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arkansas.
Mr. President, I come to the floor today to talk about Captain Samson Luke, who was 33 years old, and he was of Greenwood, Arkansas. Captain Luke is one of those people who had many, many options in life. And fortunately for us, he made the decision to serve his country, and he did so with distinction. He was a field artillery officer who served on active duty in the Army from 2000 to 2007. And he was also afterwards in the Arkansas National Guard, where he was a commander of the HHB 142nd Field Artillery. And here's a photo of him with his family. And his family was very, very important to him. He'd been to Iraq on 2 different deployments, and he was awarded the Bronze Star. And as I said, he elected to stay on with the Arkansas National Guard, and he served with distinction there. He told his wife here that he felt that he was truly at his best when he was leading men. And I want to talk about him just for a moment because, quite frankly, the bean counters over at the Pentagon have really trying to save a little money at his family's expense here. So I do want to talk about his passing away on January 10 of 2010. So less than a year ago, it was a weekend where he was doing his required training weekend. He was authorized, because he lives so close to the post, he was authorized to spend Saturday night with his wife and his 4 young children at his home instead of staying on the post. In fact, he wasn't authorized to stay on the post because he was so close to home. He had to be off post. And then the idea was that he would return the next morning and finish up his weekend on that Sunday, but he never woke up. And while dealing with this tragedy, his wife was informed that her family would not receive his death benefits. Mr. President, from my standpoint, this is a classic case of getting pencil whipped by the government. I think the Arkansas National Guard has stepped up. They've done everything they could do. They've run it through all the proper channels. They've been very supportive of making sure that his family gets the death benefits that I feel like and people in the Guard feel like they're entitled to, but the decision is out of their hands. The law states that death benefits are allocated if a soldier dies while remaining overnight at or, quote, in the vicinity of the site of the inactive duty training, quote. What I want to do with my amendment that I'm offering to the Defense Authorization Bill is I want to clarify Congress's intent and make sure that the very tiny number of people that were in his shoes his family will be entitled to these death benefits. I spent a year working on this issue with the Army and with the Department of Defense, and again, the Arkansas National Guard has stepped up and they've been great, but we are at a standstill over the DOD's interpretation of vicinity. This is an important point that I want my colleagues to understand. Had Captain Luke stayed on base, or had he stayed at a hotel at the taxpayer's expense, or had he been traveling to and from his post, his training, the family would have received these benefits. In fact, the Guard has a policy that if you live within so many miles of the post, you can't stay on the post. You have to go home. They don't have arrangements for you to stay there. They want you to go home. This saves the government money by not putting you up in a hotel or whatever else they may have to do. When you're on a National Guard training weekend, like he was, you're under orders. You're on orders for 48 continuous hours. Wherever you're sleeping, wherever you're traveling, whatever you're doing, you are on orders, you are on duty. And he was on duty when he died. In fact, if his colonel had called him at 1 o'clock in the morning and said, get over here, we need your help on something, he'd had to go over there. He was on duty, he was on orders, and he would have done that. In fact, he would have gladly stayed on the post had they had provisions for him to do that. But it worked out in his case that he was able to, because he lived so close, to stay with his wife and family. Also, let me say this, that had he been on orders and gotten out, which of course would never happen to him, but had a soldier like him gotten out and had they done something like had a DUI that night, they'd have been subject to the Code of Military Justice because they were on orders. But nonetheless, he died when he was on orders, and now the Pentagon is trying to deny him his death benefits. So what my amendment does is it clarifies congressional intent to ensure that service members who live in the area or in the vicinity of their training site can return home to their families in the evening without losing benefits. Again, they're on orders, they remain on orders. This doesn't change anything along those lines. It just clarifies congressional intent. This is a gray area. We're trying to clarify the congressional intent. This amendment will not bring back their father and their husband, but it will get them the benefits that they're entitled to. I think that we can do better for our soldiers' families. And when you look at Miranda, Miller, Macklin, Larkin, and Landis Luke in this photograph, you know that this is a very patriotic family, and this is a group of people that should be compensated for his loss. Abraham Lincoln once said, "To care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan." And those words apply in this instance. He was serving his country to the fullest, and he should be granted the benefits associated with death of a service member. And I'm fighting on behalf of him and for his family and for others in a similarly situated circumstance where we clarify that when you're on orders, when you're doing your National Guard training, you are entitled to the benefit wherever you happen to be laying your head down that particular night. Mr. President, one last word on this. We don't know exactly how much this will cost, but it will not be very much money. Someone estimated, I don't think it's an official CBO score, but someone estimated that it would probably cost $1 million, that's with an M, over 10 years. $1 million over 10 years. This is budget dust. This is so small, it's almost laughable, but it's so meaningful to this family and maybe others that in the future will find themselves in this situation. So I'd like to ask my colleagues to consider supporting the prior amendment. It's amendment number 1151, and I would love to work with the bill managers here to see if we might be able to get it into a manager's package and/or if we have to, I'd request a roll call vote on this. So, Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The senator from Nebraska.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be set aside.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I rise today to honor a great American military leader from Nebraska, Colonel Randall L. Kumus, United States Army. Colonel Kumus died in Jakarta, Indonesia, where he was the chief of the Office of Defense Cooperation at our United States Embassy. Officers in the U.S. Army have many roles. We most often recognize those who lead soldiers in combat. Others are assigned to protecting and promoting vital American interests throughout the world. During a notable career, Colonel Kumus served with equal skill and commitment in both roles. His life of public service began early when a high school art teacher invited him to attend a National Guard drill. Randy was hooked. After joining the Nebraska Army National Guard, he attended the University of Nebraska and earned an officer's commission through the ROTC program. He spent much of his early career with the famed 82nd Airborne Division, where he became a master parachutist with over 100 jumps. He led a platoon during the 1991 Gulf War and later accompanied during NATO operations in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The diplomatic side of the colonel's career emerged in the 1990s. Not satisfied with what many consider easy assignments in U.S. embassies, he immersed himself in the history, culture, and the language. He would become fluent in 4 foreign languages and attend the Pakistan Army Staff College. A crowning achievement for Colonel Kumus, beyond leading soldiers in combat, was writing a major article about relations between the United States and Pakistan. His article, titled "Positive Perceptions to Sustain the U.S.-Pakistan Relationship," was published in the prestigious Army War College Quarterly Parameters. The decorations and badges earned during his distinguished service speak to his dedication and his skill. Defense Superior Service Medal, Bronze Star, NATO Medal, Army Commendation Medal, Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, Global War on Terrorism, Meritorious Unit Citation, and several foreign nation awards. But he was probably, perhaps most proud of having earned the Master Parachutist Badge. Colonel Kumus was known to be a no-nonsense individual. He was always focused on the mission. But Randy had a soft spot. An unrelenting spiritual love of family dwelled inside this stoic, professional Army officer. His wife, Tracy, and his sons, Robert and Michael and David, well, they meant absolutely everything to him. The colonel's larger family extended through his parents, Larry and Karen Kumus of Norfolk, Nebraska, to friends and colleagues around the world who revered his strength and his compassion and his leadership. Today I ask that God be with the family of Colonel Randall Kumus. Their faith is strong, and I pray it brings them peace at this very difficult time. And may God bless all those serving in uniform and bless their families. Mr. President, I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
General speeches in the Senate for the rest of this hour. We then expect more work on fiscal year 2012 defense programs and policy. Senate leaders are aiming to finish work on the measure sometime this week. There'll be a break at 12:30 for weekly party lunches and back at 2:15 for more debate on defense programs. The House is back from their Thanksgiving break today. They'll gavel in at 2 p.m. Eastern. At 4, we expect work on 4 bills debated earlier. Scheduled today, bills to allow more skilled foreign workers in the U.S., bankruptcy protection for National Guard and reservists, giving the military priority in getting through airport screening, and a number of changes to federal worker disability compensation. A little bit later this week, increasing the steps needed to unionize a workplace, ending the presidential election campaign fund, a couple of bills aimed at reducing federal regulations, especially on small businesses. You can see the House live on C-SPAN, and of course the Senate right here on C-SPAN 2.
From Kentucky.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, warned, "The means of defense against foreign danger historically have become instruments of tyranny at home." Abraham Lincoln had similar thoughts, saying, "America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves." During war, there has always been a struggle to preserve constitutional liberties. During the Civil War, the right of habeas corpus was suspended. Newspapers were closed down. Fortunately, these rights were restored after the war. The discussion now is to suspend certain rights of due process is especially worrisome, given that we are engaged in a war that appears to have no end. Rights given up now cannot expected to return. So we do well to contemplate the diminishment of due process, knowing that these rights that we give up now may never be restored. My well-intentioned colleagues' admonitions in defending provisions of this defense bill say that we should give up certain rights, the right to due process. Their legislation would arm the military with the authority to detain indefinitely, without due process or trial, people suspected of an association with terrorism. These would include American citizens apprehended on American soil. I want to repeat that. We are talking about people who are merely suspected of terrorism or suspected of committing a crime and have been judged by no court. We are talking about American citizens that could be taken from the United States and sent to a camp at Guantanamo Bay and held indefinitely. This should be alarming to everyone watching this proceeding today because it puts every single American citizen at risk. There is one thing and one thing only that is protecting American citizens, and that's our Constitution, the checks we put on government power. Should we err today and remove some of the most important checks on state power in the name of fighting terrorism, well, then the terrorists have won. Detaining citizens without a court trial is not American. In fact, this is an alarming, arbitrary power that is reminiscent of what Egypt did with its permanent emergency law. This permanent emergency law allowed them to detain their own citizens without a court trial. Egyptians became so alarmed at that in the last spring that they overthrew their government. Recently, Justice Scalia affirmed this idea in his dissent in the Hamdi case, saying, where the government accuses a citizen of waging war against it, our constitutional tradition has been to prosecute him in federal court for treason or another crime. Scalia concluded by saying, the very core of liberties secured by our Anglo-Saxon system of separated powers has been freedom from indefinite imprisonment at the will of the executive. Justice Scalia was, as he often does, following the wisdom of our founding fathers. As Franklin wisely warned, those who give up their liberty for security may wind up with neither. And really, what security does this indefinite detention of Americans give us? The first and flawed premise, both here and in the badly misnamed Patriot Act, is that our pre-9/11 police powers were insufficient to stop terrorism. This is simply not borne out by the facts. Congress long ago made it a crime to provide or conspire to provide material assistance to al-Qaeda or other foreign terrorist organizations. Material assistance includes virtually anything of value: legal, political advice, education, books, newspapers, lodging, or otherwise. The Supreme Court sustained the constitutionality of this sweeping prohibition. We have laws on the books that can prosecute terrorists before they commit acts of terrorism. Al-Qaeda adherents may be detained, prosecuted, and convicted for conspiring to violate the material assistance prohibition. In fact, we've already done this. Jose Padilla, for instance, was convicted and sentenced to 17 years in prison for conspiring to provide material assistance to al-Qaeda. The criminal law does require and can prevent crimes from occurring before they do occur. Indeed, conspiracy laws and prosecutions in civilian courts have been routinely invoked after 9/11 to thwart embryonic international terrorism. In fact, from the Bush administration, Michael Chertoff, then head of the Justice Department's Criminal Division and later Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, testified shortly after 9/11. He underscored the history of this government in prosecuting terrorists in domestic courts has been one of unmitigated success, and one in which the judges have done a superb job of managing the courtroom and not compromising our concerns about security and our concern about classified information. We can prosecute terrorists in our courts and have done so. It's the wonderful thing about our country is that even the most despicable criminal, murderer, rapist, terrorist, our court systems do work. We can have constitutional liberty and prosecute terrorists. There is no evidence that the criminal justice procedures have frustrated intelligence collection about international terrorism. Suspected terrorists have repeatedly waived both the right to an attorney and the right to silence. Additionally, Miranda warnings are not required at all when the purpose of the interrogation is public safety. The authors of this bill errantly maintain that the bill would not enlarge the universe of detainees, people held indefinitely. I believe this is simply not the case. The current authorization for the use of military force confines the universe to persons implicated in 9/11 or who harbored those who were. This new detainee provision will expand the universe to include any person said to be part of or substantially supportive of al-Qaeda or Taliban. But remember, this is not someone who's been concluded at trial to be part of al-Qaeda. This is someone who is suspected. If you are a suspect in our country, you are usually accorded due process. You go to court, you're not automatically guilty. You're accused of a crime. But we're saying someone accused of a crime could be taken from America's soil. An American citizen accused of a crime, a suspect of a crime, could be taken to Guantanamo Bay. These terms are dangerously vague. More than a decade after 9/11, the military has been unable to define the earmarks of membership in or affiliation to either al-Qaeda or other terrorist organizations. It's an accusation and sometimes difficult to prove. Some say that to prevent another 9/11 attack, we must fight terrorism with a war mentality and not treat potential attackers as criminals. For combatants captured on the battlefield, I agree. But these are people captured or detained in America, American citizens. 9/11 didn't succeed because we granted terrorists due process. In fact, 9/11 did not succeed because al-Qaeda was so formidable, but because of human error. The Defense Department withheld intelligence from the FBI. No warrants were denied. The warrants weren't even requested. The FBI failed to act on repeated pleas from its field agents who were in possession of a laptop that may well have had information that might have prevented 9/11. But no judge ever turned down a warrant. Our criminal system didn't fail. No one ever asked for a warrant to look at Moussawi's computer in August, a month before 9/11. These are not failures of our laws. These are not failures of our Constitution. These are not reasons we should scrap our Constitution and simply send people accused of terrorism to Guantanamo Bay, American citizens. These are failures of imperfect men and women in bloated bureaucracies. No amount of liberty sacrificed at the altar of the state will ever change that. A full accounting of our human failures by 9/11 Commission has proven that enhanced cooperation between law enforcement and the intelligence community, not military action or not giving up our liberty at home, is the key to thwarting international terrorism. We should not have to sacrifice our liberty to be safe. We cannot allow the rules to change to fit the whims of those in power. The rules, the binding chains of the Constitution were written so that it didn't matter who was in power. In fact, they were written to protect us and our rights from those who hold power with good intentions. We are not governed by saints or angels. Occasionally we will elect people, and there have been times in history when those who come into power are not angels. That's why we have laws and rules that restrain what the government can do. That's why we have laws that protect you and say you're innocent until proven guilty. That's why we have laws that say you should have a trial before a judge and a jury of your peers before you're sent off to some prison indefinitely. Finally, the detainee provisions of the Defense Authorization Bill do another grave harm to freedom. They imply perpetual war for the first time in the history of the United States. No benchmarks are established that would ever terminate the conflict with al-Qaeda, Taliban, or other foreign terrorist organizations. In fact, this bill explicitly says that no part of this bill is to imply any restriction on the authorization of force. When will the wars ever end? When will these provisions end? No congressional view is allowed or imagined. No victory is defined. No peace is possible if victory is made impossible by definition. To disavow the idea that the exclusive congressional power to declare war somehow allows the President to continue war forever at whim, I will offer an amendment to this bill that will deauthorize the war in Iraq. We're bringing the troops home in January. Is there any reason why we should have an open-ended commitment to war in Iraq when the war is ending? If we need to go to war in Iraq again, we should debate on it and vote on it. It's an important enough matter that we should not have an open-ended commitment to war in Iraq. The use of military force must begin in Congress. Our founding fathers separated those powers and said that Congress has the power to declare war, and it's a precious and important power. We shouldn't give that up to the President. We shouldn't allow the President to unilaterally engage in war. Congress should not be ignored or an afterthought in these matters and must reclaim its constitutional duties. These are important points of fact. Know good and well that someday there could be a government in power that is shipping its citizens off for disagreements. There are laws on the books now that characterize who might be a terrorist. Someone missing fingers on their hands is a suspect, according to the Department of Justice. Someone who has guns, someone who has ammunition that is weatherproofed, someone who has more than 7 days of food in their house can be considered a potential terrorist. If you are suspected by these activities, do you want to have the government have the ability to send you to Guantanamo Bay for indefinite detention? A suspect. We're not talking about someone who has been tried and found guilty. We're talking about someone suspected of activities. But some of the things that make you suspicious of terrorism are having food, having more than 7 days of food, missing fingers on your hand, having ammunition, having weatherproofed ammunition, having several guns at your house. Is that enough? Are you willing to sacrifice your freedom for liberty? I would argue that we should strike these detainee provisions from this bill because we are giving up our liberty. We are giving up the constitutional right to have due process before we're sent to a prison. This is very important. I think this is a constitutional liberty we should not look at and blithely sign away to the executive power or to the military. So I would call for support of the amendment that will strike the provisions on keeping detainees indefinitely, particularly the fact that we could now for the first time send American citizens to prisons abroad. I think that is a grave danger to our constitutional liberty, and I advise a vote to strike these provisions from the bill. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time.
The Senator from Arizona.
I listened to the discussion by Senator Rand Paul and understand his theory. Facts are stubborn things. 27% of those who have been released have been back in the fight. That's fact. That's fact. And some of them have assumed leadership positions of al-Qaeda. That's fact. And if the senator from Kentucky wants to have a situation prevail where people are released and go back in the fight and kill Americans, he's right. He's entitled to that opinion. But facts are stubborn things. The facts are 27% detainees who were released went back into the fight to try to kill Americans. Mr. President, I suggest the absence of quorum.
Mr. President, if I might have a moment to respond and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Does the senator withhold his quorum call? Sure. The senator from Kentucky.
With regard to releasing the prisoners, I'm not asking that we release them. I think there probably have been some mistakes of people who've been let go. What I'm asking only for is due process, and we release some of those people without any kind of process and a flawed process. So we did make a mistake. Due process doesn't mean, and believing in the process doesn't mean necessarily that we would release these people. Due process often convicts. Jose Padilla was given 17 years in prison with due process. So I don't think it necessarily follows that I'm arguing for release, that people, particularly American citizens in the United States, not be sent to a foreign prison without due process.
Well, Mr. President, in response to that, we're not arguing that they be sent to a foreign prison. What we are arguing is that they are designated as enemy combatants. And when they're enemy combatants, then they're subject to the rules and the laws of war. And those, and again, I point out the fact that there have been a number who have been released, who have re-entered the fight, and that kind of situation is not something that we want to prevail. So I mean, as I said, facts are stubborn things, and they are designated as enemy combatants and will be treated as such during the period of combat.
Will the senator yield for a question?